like so many of us, our real estate careers have multiple stepping stones in there. So talk a little bit more about, how you got started in real estate and maybe why you got started and what your initially strategy was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually came from the corporate world. I was an engineer. I was in the tech space for a long time in Silicon Valley, as were you. And so did the corporate tech thing for a long time. And then back in 2008, my wife and I decided we were ready to start a family. We wanted to get away from working the 100-hour work weeks and really find something that would allow us to kind of put our family ahead of our business. Lifestyle, if you will. I mean, I think everybody talks about figuring out the work-life balance, but we really wanted to figure it out. So we fell into real estate in 2008, and we started out doing single family. And between 2008 and 2016-ish, we did probably about 500 flips, bought a whole bunch of single family rentals, got pretty well known for doing flips. I wrote a few books in the space, and so everybody kind of thought of me as that guy that flips houses. 2016, 2017, I was getting more than a little burned out, really burned out on single family. So I said, I'm going to take a few months and figure out what I want to do next, whether it's in real estate or outside of real estate. That few months turned into 2 years of kind of bouncing around, doing different things, focused on some other business interests I had. And what I realized after 2 years was, one, really loved real estate, but didn't like flipping houses. And two, I had a bunch of cash that I really wanted to invest in real estate, but I didn't trust anybody else to be investing that money. I'm a control freak. So after thinking about it for a little while, I realized multifamily was just a great opportunity for me, one, to jump back into real estate, but two, to find a place that not only could I be active and really build something great, but it was also a great mechanism for me to be able to invest my own cash and really grow my own wealth.
So it's interesting. I mean, I flipped houses as well. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I immediately said, oh, flipping houses, obviously. Now, nowhere in Rich Dad, Poor Dad does it say that flipping houses is actually the path. So you did way more than I did. I'm curious, why do so many people think that flipping houses is the path of financial freedom?
Yeah, and it's funny because I always get the question, I'm starting out in real estate, what should I do? Should I flip or should I buy rentals? And I think what people don't realize is that's not the right question to be asking. In the financial world, I like to think of it as there's two types of income. There's the transactional income. That's the income you trade your time for. And whether it's flipping houses or working a W-2 job, consulting, starting a business, whatever it might be, you're trading your time for money. And when you stop trading your time for money, the money stops. When you stop working, the money stops. Then over here, there's the passive income. And that's the stuff that you're trading your money for more money. So that's things like rental properties or dividend paying stocks or whatever it is that's generating cash flow. And so what I tell people is, instead of thinking flipping versus rental, think of it as transactional versus passive. Figure out what your transactional income vehicle is going to be. Is it going to be working a job? Is it going to be a consultant? Is it going to be in real estate? Whatever the highest and best use of your time is, whatever's going to pay you the most per hour, that should be your transactional income, because again, you're trading your time for that money. And then take that money and figure out what your passive income vehicle is and invest that transactional income into your passive vehicle.
So that's interesting. And this is one of the reasons I like multifamily syndications, because you have both in the same transaction. In other words, you get paid acquisition fees at closing, but then your equity then pays you downstream, which is great, because you're right. Rentals, the problem with rentals is it doesn't really generate a ton of income. You only do it with time. Therefore, you have this cash generation business to flipping, and then you stick it into the rentals. But man, the hours you have to work to achieve that is insane. And I never realized that, and very few people do. It drives me crazy trying to change that.
Absolutely. And the other two reasons I really liked the multifamily syndication, one, it's a vehicle for me to invest my own cash. I can invest on the LP side along with all my other passive investors and still be a GP, still run the deal. So it really allowed me to generate transactional income on the GP side and passive income on the LP side. And then if you structure that syndication correctly, you have the opportunity to buy out your investors at some point and hold that property long term. So it really can end up being a truly passive investment. So that was the reason why I kind of back in 2017 said, hey, I think multifamily is the way to go. I wish I had realized it sooner.
Well, I was going to just say, you strike me as a slow learner, Jay, kind of like I was. Why didn't we figure that out sooner? In fact, why didn't we bypass it entirely? But why did you not figure that out sooner and go, hey, I flipped a few houses, man. This is kind of insane. Isn't there something better out there? Like, why did you figure it out when you did?
Yeah. So for me, it was ego. And I'm willing to admit that. Like, I got well known for flipping. I was speaking nationally. I wrote 4 books. Everybody knew me as the flip guy. And I didn't want to lose that. I mean, starting over in multifamily, and we can talk about this, is hard because I essentially, in many respects, I lost my reputation. I had to start over. I had to not only learn I wasn't scared of learning a whole bunch of new stuff. But it terrified me to think that I no longer had that brand. I no longer had this thing that I could sit back on and just, if I needed to call somebody and talk to somebody, I could just pick up the phone and I could call anybody I wanted in the industry. I could do that in single family. Couldn't do that in multifamily. It was nice knowing if I went out to a broker or an agent and said, hey, I'm looking to buy some properties. And that agent said, oh, you're Jay Scott. Yeah, let me bring you stuff. I'd start calling multifamily brokers and they're like, Jay who? 500 flips? I don't care. What do I care? You've done 500 flips. That gives me, you have no credibility in this space because of what you did in the single family space. So all of that terrified me. And that was the reason that I was hesitant to kind of move out of single family. But eventually I realized that was my issue and I needed to get past that.
Speaking on that, how did you kind of overcome that? Because I've seen the same thing. I've gone, multifamily conferences and there's huge flippers that show up and they're like, hiding in the corner. It's tough. It's because you go from being the man to being like not the man, right? So what did you do to kind of speed up the learning curve and overcome that?
Yeah, so the first thing for me was to admit that I was basically starting over. I mean, there are some things in single family that translate well to multifamily, but in a lot of respects, there was a whole lot of new learning to do. There was a whole lot of new relationships to build. And so I knew that I probably could do that on my own, given enough time and energy. But there are people out there that are much better at this than I was or I am. And so my initial thought was, let's find somebody that's really good at this, figure out how to add value to them, and hopefully they'll teach me and add value to my learning. So I thought about who in my network, like I really trusted in the multifamily space. And there was one person, a woman named Ashley Wilson, who I had met several years earlier. We had talked about working together for a number of years, but she had gone multifamily back a couple of years before I was thinking about it. And I realized, okay, she's having some good success here. Why don't I reach out to her? So I reached out to her and I said, look, I'm looking for somebody that can teach me this business, somebody that can mentor me. I'm not asking for a handout. I'll come work for you for a year. I'll do whatever you need me to do. Here's what I'm good at. Put me to work. And she very nicely said, yeah, we'd love to have you come and let's figure out how to work together. And so for about a year, she mentored me and basically taught me the business, let me kind of follow her around in the deals she was doing. And then about a year and a half ago, we had an opportunity to do a deal together where she kind of brought me in as a small part of the GP. And what we realized through that deal, working from beginning to through acquisition, was that we worked really well together. We had a really nice complementary set of skills. There are things she was really good at that I'm not. There are things I'm really good at that she's not. And once that deal finished, she said, hey, would you consider like joining me full time and partnering? And so here we are about a year and a half later.
One of the questions I have is, at what point should single family house investors think about the shift to multifamily? And what is your advice to people to make that shift based on, what you've gone through?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things. One, and this is a big one, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. You need access to other people's money. We talk about OPM. If you're going to go to big multifamily, there's really only 2 ways to do it. You either raise money from a whole lot of small investors, or you raise money from one big investor, equity specifically from a whole bunch of small investors or one big investor. Most of us at the beginning of our careers don't have access to the hedge funds or the foundations or the institutional investors. So we're raising our money from bringing in 10 or 50 or 200 individual investors who are each giving us 20 or 50 or $200,000. So if you want to get into this business, you can build that network, you can build that brand and that reputation, and you can build that marketing machine that will allow you to bring in that capital. But that can take months or years. So what I tell people is think about whether you have access to that capital before you jump into multifamily. If you're thinking about jumping into multifamily, spend 6 months building relationships in your marketing machine and figuring out where the capital is going to come from before you do it. Because if you jump in today, let's say you get a deal today, even if it's a great deal, you're going to struggle to raise that money. You may have to partner with somebody. You may have to beg, borrow, steal, whatever it is. So instead of doing that, start building that marketing machine and figure out where that money is going to come from before you start making offers. That's number one. The other thing I love about multifamily is in the single family space, what we find is that as you scale in single family, it's very much a step function. So you do 1 or 2 properties a year. That's pretty easy. You don't have to put in place systems and processes to do that. But you want to get to 10 properties a year, you need some systems and processes. You probably want to hire a project manager. Maybe you want to hire a transaction coordinator. That's great. You want to get to 20 or 30 properties a year? Well, now you have to throw away all those systems that you built, and you have to build a whole new set of systems. It doesn't scale linearly. It doesn't scale. You just add one person, add one more. You really need to put in place a whole new set of systems as you take those step function scaling jumps. If you want to go from 30 to 100 a year, you have to redo everything. So single family doesn't scale well. And typically what I find is that most single family investors will get to a point where they can't figure out how to scale to the next level. They can get from 2 a year to 5 a year. They can get from 5 a year to 10 a year. Maybe they get from 10 to 20 a year, but then they can't get to a 50 or 100 a year because they just aren't good enough at the systems and processes. What I found in multifamily is that things scale a whole lot more linearly. There's the same pieces of the puzzle every deal you do, whether you're doing 1 deal at a time or 10 deals at a time. So once you build that team, scaling is really all about just bringing on more people to backfill the tactical issues. It's not changing the strategy. It's not changing the structure of the organization. It's just adding more people to handle more work. So multifamily scales so much better than single family. And typically what I tell people is you outgrow single family because you get to the point where either you can't scale anymore, or like me, I probably could have scaled a little bit higher, but I was so burned out and I was so tired I didn't want to. So multifamily is a great place to go when you feel like you've scaled out of single family and you're ready for something else that's bigger, but not necessarily more difficult.